let's take a look at the tariffs themselves before we get deeper into the explainer. So hopefully my editor can show on screen these are the tariffs. So let's just have a quick look at this list. So China. Trump is framing this as if China is imposing a 67% tariff, and then he's very generously halved it to 34%. Not actually what's happening. Vietnam is not imposing 90% tariffs on US goods. All he's basically done is taken the exports from, say, Vietnam. He's taken the exports from the US to Vietnam, and then he's divided one number by the other and done it as a percentage. So the trade imbalance between US and Vietnam is 90%. So 90% more goes from Vietnam to the US than the other way around. That's how he's come up with these numbers. But he hasn't framed it like that. He's framed it as if these are reciprocal tariffs, which is inaccurate. Why has he done that? I suppose it's easier to justify. It's an easier pitch. It's easier to get people on board because most people are. And I had this on my segment yesterday. I put the segment up and I explained, no, actually, these are not reciprocal tariffs. That's not how it worked. So many people were saying, oh, well, if we're getting charged this, then it's generous to be charging half of it. No, that's not what's happening. And I was actually very supportive. I am supportive of this policy, very supportive. One of the relatively few people who are supportive of this policy, and I still had some knuckle draggers coming in and saying that I was bashing Trump for this. No, I'm not. I'm just. Let's be real. He's not doing reciprocal tariffs. He's trying to address a trade imbalance, and I support him for that. And I think it's right. It's fine, but it is what it is. It's a very blunt method, which, like I say, I'm not sure there's a better method available, and it's not reciprocal. But he's framing it in that way. Okay, so these are the countries that are on his list. So you can see there, China are going to get tariffs of 34%. I mean, actually, 34% does sound about right for the effective tariffs that China is imposing on the US effectively. So actually, the numbers that he actually comes out with, I'm kind of fine with. European Union 20%, Vietnam 46%, because Vietnam produces a shitload of apparel, textiles, Nike, your trainers and polo shirts and all the rest of it. A lot of them are produced in Vietnam, and Vietnam has a limited demand for American goods. Anyway, Taiwan 32%, Japan 24%, India 26%. These tariffs are much larger than people were expecting. People were expecting at the top end, all the analysts were thinking top end maybe 20 to 25%, probably lower. And so a lot of people have been caught out, a lot of scrambling, thus the stock price move, because people are repositioning their portfolio, getting out of companies like Nike, which are hit well beyond what they were expecting it to happen. Switzerland 31%. Switzerland doesn't. I don't believe. I had a quick dig into this. I don't believe Switzerland is imposing any great tariffs on the US. I mean, they're imposing some, but not that high. So Indonesia 32, Malaysia 24. Let's go to United Kingdom 10. Yeah, because we don't have a trade imbalance with the US, because our economy is also too orientated towards services. In our case, financial services and media. Actually, come to think of it, some of us do financial services and media combined, but that's a subset. But you get the point. The UK is doing a lot of ethereal type stuff, and therefore we don't produce a lot of goods, and therefore we don't have a goods trade imbalance with the US. So we come out of this anyway. We go into these tariffs in a bit more detail later, but just wanted to give you a look at it. Next thing, let's take a look at the executive order itself. I won't read through the executive order itself because it is very long and you would get bored, and so would I. So instead, let's try and pick out the key elements within it. So it's framed as a national emergency, and it's framed that way because there is a 1.2 trillion US trade goods deficit. And that is up 40% in only 5 years. And it's framed in the executive order, and I agree with this, that is a threat to national security and the economy. So thus an emergency, thus an executive order. And the stat that was quite striking for me is US manufacturing has dropped to 17.4% of global output, down from 28.4% in 2021. So down from, call that, let's round to the nearest integer, from 28% down to 17%, in the space of about 20 years. That is a significant loss. I think they go on to point out that 5 million jobs have been lost in manufacturing since 1997. And that engenders weakness throughout the US economy. Manufacturing drives 55% of patents, they say. It drives 75% of research and development. And they particularly highlight areas that they're concerned of, such as defense and pharmaceuticals. Fair enough. They highlight the supply chain risks. So they highlight the over-reliance on foreign goods in, sectors like, in sectors like defense and pharmaceuticals, citing COVID-19 as an example of where that was really brought to the fore. And other supply chain issues they highlight is, say, for example, the Houthi attacks, meaning that certain goods really... I mean, the Houthi attacks didn't have a huge impact on the US. I mean, on the northeast coast, it would have done, but the Houthi thing was a much bigger problem for Europe, less so Northern Europe. For the Mediterranean, it was devastating. But nevertheless, it's a good example of a supply chain disruption along with COVID. They highlight defense and agriculture. So they point out that, US stockpiles of military things is low. Agricultural inputs are low. Slight tangent, but okay, I will go on a tangent now. One of the weird thought experiments that I sometimes run through my head when I've got nothing better to do, like I'm driving to bloody Swindon or something, is to think about, what would happen if you took a country, a modern country, and you just sent it back in time to like the Roman Empire or something. And you tend to think this one through, and basically any modern country, because they're so high up the tech tree, would end up conquering the world eventually, even like bloody Malta or, something, Belgium, probably would eventually, because, today we have guns and we know how things work and stuff like that. Medicines, as long as the Romans or the Gauls didn't completely rush you on day one and overwhelm you, you probably end up taking over the world. But then there's the whole question about how easy would it be, and make this comparison. If Britain of the 1960s was sent back in time to the days of the Roman Empire, they would just clean sweep the world within a few decades, no problems, because they were able to produce everything that they needed to produce domestically. They couldn't quite feed their population because we were reliant on US agricultural support for a good few years after the war. But we could do a hell of a lot better than we can today. If you were to send modern Britain back and put it in that situation, force it to be self-reliant until it could, conquer enough land and modernize it and bring in the farm equipment and all the rest of it. If you were to do it to modern Britain, yes, it would probably still take over the world eventually, but it might take 100 years, because the first 30 to 40 years would just be absolute collapse, absolute total collapse. We cannot remotely feed ourselves anymore. We don't have remotely enough energy. We've got rid of vast amounts of our manufacturing. It would be absolutely devastating. Cities would tear themselves apart and then promptly starve. It's an interesting thought experiment, whatever that, that appeals to me sometimes. But then you start applying it to other countries. Which countries would do well in that sort of scenario? Modern Russia would actually do very well. They have good agriculture, they have good commodities, they have good energy, they have decent-ish industrial output. Their agricultural output would be very starchy. It would be a lot of potatoes, but I think they even get a little bit of citrus fruit. But you get my point. They would have a quite severely limited diet, but they could do it. China could do it. A whole bunch of countries could do it. What about when we cycle back to the US? How would the US fare? Well, the US is starting to look a bit like Britain in my thought scenario. The US of 30 years ago would be able to play that game significantly better than the US of today. The US of 30 years ago had better. Well, actually, the energy reserves are not the worst aspect of this. Back in the early 2000s, the US had a fantastic energy situation with the shale it was bringing online. But the US could do a lot, would have done better, just 20 years ago because of the manufacturing aspect of it, even though it still has strong energy and strong agriculture. And what Trump is trying to do is put himself in a situation where he basically just doesn't become Britain. He's looked at the cautionary tale of Britain of becoming reliant on foreign imports, and is thinking, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to get into the situation that Britain is in now, and good for him.
If you would like to see the full version of this premium video, please head over to lotuseaters.com and subscribe to gain full access to all of our premium content.